Well, it's early days, and that's why I spoke to the Foreign Minister, Maripana, yesterday, and our Prime Minister spoke to the Sri Lankan, or is due to be speaking to the Sri Lankan Prime Minister this afternoon, and our offer is there to support them in any way possible. But I think one of the things that we can do is actually what this House is doing this afternoon, where we had a nearly full House of people from all political parties wanting to show their solidarity with our friends in Sri Lanka, and I think that's something of which we can be rightly proud.
Mike Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, can I associate myself with the comments from my Mancunian colleague from Blakely and Broughton, and send my deepest sympathy to Lord Keith Bradley and his family today. There are 1.2 million Catholics in Sri Lanka who will be frightened to go to Mass this Sunday coming. The church aid agencies are saying to me today that the two priorities are security intelligence to help the government there with that, and expertise to help rebuild family lives. The Foreign Secretary eloquently covered those two matters in his statement, but will he personally undertake to look at how well the Foreign and Commonwealth Office does in those two areas to help us inform the Mount Stephen review?
Of course, I'd be very, very happy to do that, and I think that sadly what happened in Sri Lanka itself is going to colour this review to make us consider more fully issues around terrorism that when we originally set up that review we perhaps weren't thinking would be such a big focus, but I think it has to be.
James Morris.
Speaker, having visited Sri Lanka several times over the last 30 years, I'm acutely aware that what makes Sunday's events even more tragic is the progress that has been made in that country over the last 10 to 15 years, with prosperity, national unity, and real prospects for becoming a tiger in Southeast Asia. So would the Secretary of State reiterate our commitment to work with the Sri Lankan government and the Sri Lankan people to make sure that they build on that progress that they've made over the last 10 to 15 years, so that they can become that prosperous and unified country?
I can absolutely give him that assurance. We actually are the penholder for Sri Lanka in the United Nations Security Council, and so we have a particular responsibility to make sure that there is proper accountability and reconciliation as part of the progress that's been made. But I do want to thank him for pointing out the progress that's been made in Sri Lanka. I think in these dark moments it's very important not to forget that this is a country where there is actually a lot of hope given the progress that's been made in the last 10 years.
Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, and I thank both front benches for their comments today, because whether in a Christian church in Sri Lanka, a Pittsburgh synagogue or a mosque in Christchurch, the targeted murder of people at prayer because of their faith is a particularly heinous and hateful act of terrorism. But given the dangerous levels of intolerance that we are seeing in the world today, would the Foreign Secretary agree with me that it is incumbent on each one of us as elected representatives to reflect on the words that we use, to the arguments that we engage in, and the way in which we conduct our political debate, to ensure that we contribute to a world that is more tolerant and more inclusive, rather than breeding hatred and fear?
Well, I can't really add anything to that, because I think she speaks very, very powerfully of the responsibility that all elected members have in this place. Except to say that to actually do what she says is quite challenging, because elections are very competitive things, and the way that you get headlines is by saying strong things that grab people's attention, but we must always make sure we stand the right side of that line and don't foster the kind of hatred that we've so tragically witnessed this weekend.
It's right that we should respond to this unspeakable outrage with a message of tolerance, calm and peace. But it's also right that this wickedness should not go unpunished. Does my right honourable friend agree that our intelligence agencies, including GCHQ in my constituency, should be authorised to give whatever support is deemed appropriate to their Sri Lankan counterparts to ensure that those responsible for this wickedness are brought to justice?
I can absolutely give him that assurance, and I'm pleased that he mentioned GCHQ because they have done a spectacularly important job in recent years in helping us to understand the Daesh networks, how they operate online, and that has played a very, very significant role in the defeat of Daesh that we've seen, at least in terms of their territorial possessions in recent months.
Therefore,
I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and for the response from my right honourable friend. I think they set a perfect tone for this exchange, and it really does bring home, as my honourable friend has said, that we have to consider how we behave and set the very highest standards for ourselves in how we conduct our politics if we're going to show leadership at times like this. And intolerance can reach into all of our communities. I'm reminded by the fact that yesterday was the 26th anniversary of the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And this brings home to us the need for all of us to face up to intolerance wherever it is. And can I just ask the Foreign Secretary if the Bishop Truro is conducting an inquiry and looking specifically at Christian faith and how Christians are being persecuted around the world. What we must avoid with that is any suggestion that others would seek to prey on. That we're setting one religion up to be more important than another, and I know that the Foreign Secretary wants to avoid that, but that is something that we need to be aware of.
I entirely understand why he raises that issue. I want to reassure him that we support freedom of all religious belief. It's just that we think that Christianity has been slightly left behind for various reasons, but in terms of the number of people persecuted for their belief, it's more Christians than any other faith, so we want to make sure that we're giving that the proper attention it deserves, but not excluding any faith in our concerns.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. May I also thank the Foreign Secretary and the Shadow Foreign Secretary for what they've said and the way in which they've said it, and indeed all her colleagues. Would he agree with me that the people of Sri Lanka deserve immense praise for the fact that in their country there is freedom of belief? We've already heard mention of Muslims, of Buddhists, of Christians, of Hindus and others who are able to practice their belief, and indeed this atrocity was only possible because Christians were freely able to worship together on Easter Sunday. In so many other countries around the world, that is not possible.
Well, I think he makes a profoundly important point, and I totally agree with him. The perpetrators of this evil attack were trying to stop freedom of religious belief, and we must make sure that they are not successful.
Speaker, can I declare an interest as Chair of the APPG and Freedom of Religious Belief? And I want to especially thank the Foreign Secretary for his article in the Sunday paper just yesterday. He referred to the story about God's smuggler, which he read when he was 10-year-old, I read when I was about 24 or thereabouts. Maybe that's the age difference in the both of us as well. But you also referred, and it's very important, Britain cares about those who stand up for the right to believe. And I think the article that the Foreign Secretary put in and not only spoke for his department, but for our government, but also for the MPs and ourselves in this House and for our nation as well. The photographs of children at Sunday school of people closing their eyes in prayer to be murdered because they were Christians resonates with us all, and very, very important. We can pray as we do. We can also have emotional support, which I think is very important. But also, I think some of us are aware of some of the life-changing injuries that there quite clearly are for those people who are Sri Lankans and across the way. They've been deprived. Some have been deprived of their wage earner as well, and I think that's that grief brings us together. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary, is he able to help give the medical help that is necessary for those who have had life-changing injuries? And as he rightly said about the Christians being probably some of the poorer people in Sri Lanka, can we reach out and give financial assistance to those people as well? I think if we can do those things, then we can give the innocents the practical help that they so much need.
Well, I know that my colleague, the International Development Secretary, will look with the greatest of sympathy on any need that we uncover for that kind of support. But I thank him for drawing attention to the people who've had life-changing injuries. Around 500 people were injured in these attacks, as well as the over 300 who tragically lost their lives, including, of course, an employer, locally employed employee of the British Council and his wife.
Malhotra. I would like to thank the Foreign Secretary, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, and all colleagues who've spoken in the course of these exchanges, both for what they've said and for the way in which they've said it. It is the right thing in itself to do, but I think I speak for all colleagues in expressing the hope that it might offer some very modest comfort and succour to the families and friends of those who have been slaughtered or injured in the course of these horrific attacks. Thank you, colleagues.